There are towns that remember no names, not because few people pass through them, but because people come and go too quickly to leave a mark. The border town of Vartok was exactly that kind of place. A market, 3 taverns, a blacksmith who charged too much and worked well, and a permanent smell of manure and river water that, locals said, lingered even in winter. In Vartok, no one asked questions. That was its greatest virtue. She came back before dawn, not because she was in a hurry. It was simply more convenient that way. Fewer people on the streets, fewer stares. Less of that particular silence that falls when an orc woman walks through a human town and everyone around her suddenly finds reason to look elsewhere. Grima had long since stopped noticing that silence. Or, more precisely, she had long since stopped allowing herself to notice it, which in the end amounts to the same thing. The contract was closed. 3 days in the forest, the target neutralized, payment received. Clean, no excess. Exactly the way she liked to work. The tavern called the Old Mushroom greeted her with the smell of soured ale and an oil lamp the owner economized to the last. The innkeeper, a stout man with perpetually damp hands, looked up from the counter, saw her, and immediately made a show of being very busy polishing a mug. The mug was already dry. He kept polishing it for a good 10 seconds. "Same room?" said Grima. She wasn't asking. "Yes, ma'am." He didn't look at her. "Breakfast in the morning?" "No." She took the key and walked to the stairs. The floorboard on the 3rd step creaked. She stepped over it automatically without thinking. Some things the body remembers on its own. The room was small, but it was enough. Grima needed nothing more. A bed, a table, a window facing east, meaning light in the morning, which was useful. She dropped her travel pack on the floor, unbuckled her weapon belt, and hung it over the chair back so she could find it in the dark within 3 seconds. Then she took a small bundle from her pack, wrapped in a piece of worn leather. She unwrapped it. The figurine was small, barely larger than a palm. Poorly carved, if she was being honest. Lopsided proportions, one eye slightly higher than the other, the nose more resembling a triangular lump. A child had made it himself from soft wood, with a penknife she had given him for his name day. He said it was her. Grima had looked at the figurine and said, "My nose isn't like that." He had laughed. She set the figurine on the edge of the table, not by the bed, on the edge. As though there were some important difference between brought it along and keeping it close. Perhaps there was. On the table lay a parchment. It had been delivered while she was on the job, as arranged. Grima unrolled it, scanned it quickly. A map, written in small, careful handwriting. A description of the target. A payment figure. The number at the bottom was good. Very good. She stared at it longer than at everything else. Not because she had doubts. The job was standard, the risk acceptable. She was simply calculating, estimating how much more. How many more contracts like this one, how many more nights like this one, before she could finally what? She folded the parchment and put it in her pack. That question she hadn't finished in nearly 2 years. It would begin, reach the middle, and stop there, running up against something that had no name. Or rather, the name existed, but saying it aloud served no purpose. Names don't change what has already happened. Grima lay down on top of the blanket without undressing. She put one hand under her head and stared at the ceiling. Outside, dawn was beginning to come. Somewhere on the street a rooster crowed, hoarsely, resentfully, as though it too resented the obligation. She closed her eyes, 3 days from now. The temple. The artifact. The payment. Simple. Falling asleep, she did not think about the fact that simple is a word the world tends to use precisely before everything becomes complicated. That same night, 2 blocks to the west, in a tavern with the pretentious name, the Golden Rooster, Gustav was losing at dice. More precisely, he was making a show of losing. That was an important distinction. Again, he said, and slid his coins to the center of the table with the air of a man whose better judgment had been defeated by enthusiasm. Across from him sat a merchant, round, self-satisfied, with a gold chain at his neck and the conviction that he could read people. Beside him stood 2 large, quiet men, guards or friends. Gustav hadn't decided yet, and for now it didn't matter. The dice fell. Gustav winced. The merchant laughed. "Not your night, friend." "Not my night," Gustav agreed with a disarming smile. "But my conversation's going well. You hadn't finished about the temple." The merchant tensed slightly, instinctively for just a fraction of a second, but Gustav was already refilling his cup from the pitcher, and the gesture dissolved the wariness before it could form into suspicion. "Ah, the temple." The merchant drank. "Nothing much to finish. Abandoned. Nobody's been there in 200 years. The locals go around it, say it's an ill place." "Ill? How?" "Well," the merchant shrugged. "Those who went in didn't always come out, or they came out, but not quite right." He made a circular gesture near his temple. "I see." Gustav nodded. "And what's inside, does anyone know?" "Some artifacts, apparently. Old things. I wouldn't go near it." He set his cup down. "What's your interest? A collector?" "No, I just like ill places." Gustav smiled. "There's usually more going on in them than in good ones." The merchant laughed again. Gustav laughed with him, lost 1 more round of dice, almost honestly this time, and a quarter of an hour later cited fatigue, said warm goodbyes, and stepped out into the night air. On the street, he didn't go immediately to his room. He stopped at the wall, took a folded map from inside his coat, unrolled it in the light of the lantern above the tavern door, found the right point in the forest to the east with his finger. The temple. Gustav looked at the map without smiling. His face was different when he thought no one was watching, calmer, sharper, and somehow heavier, as though, beneath the charm, there lived another man, one who rarely came into the light. He folded the map. The information was good, the source reliable, insofar as sources are ever reliable when they don't know they're being used as sources. The artifact existed. The payment for it existed too. Gustav knew the buyer, the price, and the terms. All of it had been verified. There remained one small matter, what the mage in Vartok had called a dual-entry protective mechanism. Gustav hadn't entirely understood what that meant, but had thought to ask for details and had remembered them. In his line of work, details often mattered more than the larger picture. He went back inside, climbed to his room. The room was ordinary. He scanned it, habit ingrained over years, checked the window, the door, the gap beneath the bed. Lay down, folded his hands behind his head. His belongings held nothing personal, nothing at all. A change of clothes, a set of tools, money in 3 different places, papers under 2 different names. Everything functional, everything without history, no letters, no mementos, not even a book, though he liked to read. Books left traces. Everything left traces, if you allowed things to linger. Gustav had long since stopped allowing that. Down the hall a door slammed. He didn't flinch. Outside a dog barked. He didn't listen. He lay and looked into the darkness with the expression of a man who had no reason to sleep poorly. That was untrue. But an untruth held long enough begins to feel like habit, and habit is almost like truth. Falling asleep, he thought briefly of the merchant, of the guards, of the mark he'd spotted at the edge of his vision on the wall by the tavern entrance, a small scratched image that most people would have taken for an accidental scrape. Gustav knew it was no accident. Someone knew he was in Vartok. He made a mental note to deal with that tomorrow, after the temple. If, of course, there was a tomorrow. The temple did not appear on official maps. That alone said a great deal. The cartographers of the borderlands were meticulous people. They marked every well, every ford, every ruined mill that hadn't ground grain in 30 years. If something had been deliberately left without a mark, it meant someone had once decided that knowing about this place cost more than it was worth. Grima found it by the description in the contract. 3 days east of Vartok, where the old road forks at a dry riverbed, bear left, then follow the hills for half a day more. The landmark, 3 pines grown so close together they seemed to be seeking warmth from one another. Behind them, a hollow. In the hollow, stone. Stone turned out to be an imprecise word for it. The temple was buried in the earth more than it stood above it, as though the builders had intended to hide it, or the ground had spent 2 centuries slowly swallowing the lower floors. Only the upper portion protruded, dark basalt covered in moss, with narrow slits where windows might have been, and an entrance portal above which someone, in some forgotten age, had carved an ornament, complex, unfamiliar, of the kind that specialists called pre-imperial period, and about which in truth no one knew anything at all. Grima studied the approaches. She circled the perimeter in a wide arc, slowly, without stepping into the open before she needed to. No signs of recent presence. Grass undisturbed, branches unbroken, birds behaving normally. She waited another quarter of an hour, simply to be certain. Then she stepped out from the trees and walked toward the portal, and heard footsteps from the other side almost immediately. She stopped. Her hand found the grip of her weapon. A man came around the corner of the temple, medium height, in a dark grey traveling cloak, with the air of a tourist who had wandered somewhere he hadn't intended. Were it not for the way he moved correctly. Too correctly for a tourist. Softly, without unnecessary sound. With that economy of motion that comes from many years of practice and no longer requires conscious effort. He saw her the same moment she saw him. For a fraction of a second, both of them went still. Then he smiled. "Well," he said, "either this is a very large coincidence, or we have the same informant." He looked her over without hurry, professionally. Without that particular tension most people showed when meeting an orc woman for the first time. He simply assessed. Orcs and humans at a forbidden temple at dawn. This is either the beginning of a good story or a very bad one. "Go right," said Grima. He paused for a moment. "Just like that. No introduction. You're already here. I'm already here." She moved her hand away from the weapon. Not because she trusted him, but because she saw no reason to spend the energy. "One place, we'll split inside." "Split inside," he repeated, with the intonation of someone tasting a word. "Optimistic." He tilted his head slightly. "Gustav? Doesn't matter." That usually means Grima, or something close. She looked at him. "Gustav," he said again with the same easy tone. "In case you need to shout into the dark." "I won't need to," she answered, and walked toward the portal. He waited just long enough that it wouldn't look like obedience, then followed. Inside, it was colder than outside. not simply shadow and damp. A different kind of cold, the kind that lives in places where nothing warm has been for a long time. The air stood still, like water in a sealed jug. The echo of their footsteps drifted sideways and returned late, as though the space here followed its own rules. Grima moved first. The corridor ran straight, then turned once, twice. The walls were covered with the same ornament as the exterior, only here it felt denser, more insistent. In some places the stone was scorched, long ago, evenly, as from intense and sustained heat. "Beautiful," said Gustav quietly behind her. "Don't lose focus." "I'm not losing focus. I'm doing several things at once." A brief pause. "Can you see well in the dark?" "Better than you." "Then tell me if there's a pit ahead." She didn't answer. But she slowed her pace slightly, just enough for him to walk beside her rather than behind. She couldn't have explained why. Most likely it was simply more practical if they needed to turn around quickly. The corridor opened into a circular hall. The hall was low-ceilinged, no more than 2 human heights above them. At its center stood a plinth of the same black stone, roughly chest-high on Grima. On the plinth lay the artifact. They both stopped. The artifact looked unexpectedly modest for everything that surrounded it. Small, about 2 cupped palms in size, made of dark metal in a strange angular shape that was difficult to describe in a single word. Not quite a disc, not quite a polyhedron. On its surface ran the same ornament as the walls, but etched with such precision it seemed to have been cut with a needle under a magnifying glass. No glow, no hum, no obvious signs of magical activity. It simply lay there. "Is that it?" Gustav asked. "Looks like it. Underwhelming for a well-guarded artifact." "I prefer it that way." She took a step toward the plinth. He took a step toward the plinth. They both realized this at the same moment, and both stopped. Silence. "Half," said Gustav. "No. Half the artifact's value. You know the buyer. I know the buyer. Either we have the same one or different ones. Either way, half is better than nothing. Nothing is what you'll get if you leave. And nothing is what you'll get if you leave," he replied with the same composure. "And we both know neither of us is leaving." Grima looked at him. He looked at her. "We approach together," she said at last. "I take it. You get a quarter. A third. A quarter." "Grima," he began, and she understood he'd guessed right. A quarter is disrespectful. Respect is earned. I came here first. You came from the other side. That doesn't count. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He narrowed his eyes slightly, not in anger, more with the look of a chess player facing an inconvenient move. "Fine," he said. "A quarter." A pause. "But I reach for the artifact first." "I reach for the artifact first. Then we're not moving anywhere. We approach together and take it together. We decide afterward." A long silence. "All right," said Gustav. They approached the plinth from opposite sides. Grima looked at the artifact up close. The ornament on its surface was even more intricate. It intertwined, changed direction, began nowhere and ended nowhere. She was no expert in magic, but she had spent enough time around people who practiced it to know things like this were not made carelessly. There was a system here. She didn't finish the thought. Her hand touched the artifact, and in that same fraction of a second, Gustav's hand touched it too. The ornament blazed, not with light, with sensation. It was like a blow from the inside, instantaneous and total, seizing everything at once, muscles, bones, the space behind the sternum where nothing usually feels anything. Grima heard Gustav exhale sharply, and that was the last thing she heard clearly. Then darkness. The first thing she felt was someone else's pain, not her own. Her own was there too, dull, aching from the base of her skull to her shoulder blades, the kind that comes from striking stone hard, but beneath it, beside it, woven into it so naturally that at first it was impossible to separate. Another pain, sharp, in the right shoulder, fresh. Grima opened her eyes. The hall's ceiling, the ornament above her. She was lying on her back beside the plinth. The artifact was gone, the plinth bare. How much time had passed, she couldn't say. Something stirred to her right. Gustav was sitting up, holding his right shoulder. His face carried the focused expression of someone calculating the extent of damage. "Alive," he said, more to himself than to her. Grima stood, slower than she would have liked. There was a ringing in her head. "The artifact," she said. "Gone. I already looked." His voice shifted slightly, and she felt it before she saw it. Something changed in his expression. He stopped mid-sentence. Grima felt it before she understood it, because something moved inside her, not physically, as though a new nerve had appeared somewhere in her chest, one that hadn't been there before, and it was now carrying something that wasn't hers. Not pain, something between surprise and unease, colored with a strange quality, almost sharp, almost watchful. She understood it was his. "What is this?" she said. Not a question, a statement. "I don't know yet," he answered. His voice was level, but she could feel that behind the steadiness lay the same confusion she carried. "You're feeling something that isn't yours." "Yes. My shoulder hurt when I woke. Your shoulder." He looked at her, then slowly lowered the hand he'd been pressing to his shoulder. "The shoulder," he said. "I hit the plinth when I fell. You felt it." Her voice stayed even, deliberately even. "Yes." Silence. Gustav got to his feet, fully, without using the wall for support, though from the way he moved, he would have liked to. He looked around, then looked at her again. "All right," he said at last, in the tone of a man who takes a complicated situation in hand simply because it's more useful than not. "We go outside. We figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out. We just need to separate." "Agreed." He gestured toward the exit. "After you." They left into the corridor. Grima walked first, quickly at her usual pace. At the corridor's bend, 20 meters open between them. She barely noticed. She was simply walking. At 30 meters, something tightened. Not painfully. Simply. As though the air had grown denser, and with every step forward, something pulled backward. At 40 meters, she stopped. Not because she chose to. Her legs simply grew heavier, and something inside pulled so taut that walking forward required a conscious effort she hadn't needed before. "Stop!" Gustav's voice came from behind her. It was tight. "Don't move." She stood still. She heard his footsteps. He was moving toward her, quickly. When the distance between them dropped to 10 meters, the tension eased. At 5, it nearly vanished. They stood in the corridor and looked at each other. "So," said Gustav. "So," said Grima. "This is—" He started the sentence and stopped in the middle. Several seconds of silence. Then he exhaled. "We need a mage. We need to separate." "We just established that we can't separate past," he estimated, 40 meters before it becomes unpleasant, which means we need a mage. "I don't travel with people. I don't travel with orcs." "Then we're both unlucky." "We're both unlucky," he agreed immediately, and with such ease that Grima lost the thread of the argument for a moment. But that doesn't change the situation. There's a mage in Vartok, a good one. He'll sort it out. You know a mage in Vartok. I know mages in many places. It's a useful quality. The same light, effortless smile. The one Grima was already beginning to find suspicious. It's 3 days back. I suggest we agree on some basic rules. What rules? No personal questions. No questions the other person doesn't want to answer, and a pause. No fighting in public places without warning. That last one especially applies to you. Why to me? Because if you get into a fight, I'll feel every hit. He said it calmly. Not as a complaint, not as a threat, simply as information. And I'd prefer not to experience someone else's pain unannounced when I can avoid it. Call it a personal weakness. Grima looked at him for a long moment, long enough that most people would have grown uneasy. He didn't grow uneasy. Agreed, she said at last. Excellent. He turned toward the exit. I'm Gustav. If you decide to remember it, I remember. What's your name? You already guessed. I like to have it confirmed. Grima, she said. Now move. They walked out of the temple into grey morning sky. The sun had not climbed high. The air smelled of wet pine and cold earth. Somewhere above them a bird cried. Grima stopped at the threshold and looked back, at the dark basalt, at the ornament above the door, at the empty plinth barely visible in the depths. Inside, it was still there, the foreign thing, quiet now, almost imperceptible, but present, like a draught in a room whose source you cannot find. She didn't let it show that it unsettled her, because it did. 3 days' travel from the temple back to Vartok. Grima knew this road. She'd walked it in the opposite direction 3 days ago, alone, without conversation, at her own pace. It had seemed simple then. 3 days of forest, hills, one ford, and a dusty stretch of road at the end. Now there was a man walking beside her. That in itself was an inconvenience, but a predictable one, the kind she knew how to manage. Grima had learned to ignore the presence of people nearby. Years of practice. The problem was not the presence. The problem was that the presence could not be ignored, because it now existed inside her. The first few hours she tried to understand the logic. His physical pain, that was clear, that was something she could track. When he caught his foot on a root and bruised his knee, she felt the jab in her own leg before she heard his muted curse. When he burned 2 fingers on the cookpot at their first rest stop, a short, sharp burn, she pulled her hand back before she understood why. That was his pain. Foreign. Living in her body. But there was something worse. The emotions. Not specific thoughts, not words. Just background. Quiet, constant, like the distant sound of running water. Gustav walked and thought about something of his own. She didn't know what, and didn't want to. And he thought with that particular business-like calm beneath which she was already learning to distinguish layers. On the surface, lightness, almost serenity. Deeper, something focused and sharp. Beyond that, Grima didn't look. On principle. You're angry, said Gustav. She didn't answer. Not asking why, he added. Just noting it, so you know that it's... A brief pause as he chose the word. Noticeable. Grima stopped. She turned to face him. He stopped too. 1 step behind her, with the expression of someone who had made a neutral observation and was prepared to defend its neutrality. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't comment. She looked at him directly. Whatever you feel. It's none of your business. I completely agree, he said immediately. I would prefer not to feel anything at all. That wasn't a request, it was a warning. Anger has a... He searched briefly. Texture. It's difficult not to notice. then don't notice. I'll try, he said, in the same even tone. You try too. There's plenty coming from my side as well. Grima walked on. For a while they moved in silence. She turned his words over without meaning to. The thought had simply caught. Texture. She hadn't expected that word. From most people in a situation like this, she would have anticipated complaints, accusations, or attempts to ask questions. He did none of those things. He named the thing plainly and stepped back. That was neutral, manageable. She didn't let herself think about it any further. Don't fall behind, she said over her shoulder. I'm not falling behind. The first day passed in a silence that would have been almost bearable if not for the constant foreign presence somewhere behind her sternum. By evening, Grima noticed she was instinctively tracking his background. Not intentionally, the new nerve simply worked on its own, without her permission. When he was calm, it was barely perceptible. When something shifted, she felt it before he had time to show it. At their first camp, she chose a spot by a tree, away from the fire. Habit. He chose a spot by the fire, also habit by the look of it. They ate in silence. She turned her back to him while unpacking her bag. Ground rules, he said. She looked over her shoulder. You said, no personal talk. He was watching the fire. I agree. But then we need something we can talk about. Otherwise, 3 days will be very long. I like long days. So do I, when they're long in the right way. He stirred the coals with a stick. The route, tactics, weather, food. What we'd do if we were attacked again. Does that work? Grima considered. That works, she said. Good. First practical question, then. Do you know who might have set that trap? No. Neither do I, he said. But I have a few ideas. I'll tell you tomorrow if you want. Tomorrow, she said. She wrapped herself in her cloak and closed her eyes. Through the bond came his calm. Businesslike. A little tired. Not unpleasant. That too was unpleasant. The fact that it wasn't. On the second day of travel, Grima learned several things about what it meant to walk beside Gustav. First, he talked a great deal, not continuously. He had enough sense to leave pauses, but steadily more than she considered necessary. He commented on the weather, the road, a single tree that grew at an improbable angle from the earth. At one point he stopped for half a minute to watch 2 crows dividing something on a branch. Grima walked on. He caught up in 30 seconds, not out of breath. Second, he was observant. Not demonstratively. She would have caught a demonstration. But sometimes he said something that revealed he had seen more than he appeared to. He mentioned tracks in the mud at the ford, correctly identified the number of people who had passed and their direction. He spotted smoke beyond the hills before she did. He made no comment, simply adjusted their route slightly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. Third, and this was the hardest, his presence through the bond shifted over the course of the day. In the morning it was gathered and faintly alert. By midday it leveled into a working focus, and toward evening something else sometimes appeared. Grima couldn't name it precisely yet. Something like tiredness, but not physical. As though at the end of a day a person ran low not on strength, but on something else. Something finer. At the second camp she took out her rations and, at the edge of her vision, watched Gustav sort through his things. She already knew there was nothing personal among them. She had glimpsed it the first time. Now she saw it fully. A change of clothes, a wrapped set of tools, a coin purse, a flat flask, 2 rolls of papers. Everything functional, everything without history. Her hand moved of its own accord toward the leather bundle at the bottom of her pack, and she only realized what she was doing when her fingers had already found the familiar shape beneath the leather. She didn't take the figurine out. She moved her hand away, as though that had been the intention all along. "Have you always worked alone?" Gustav asked. He didn't look up from his things. Grima looked at him. "That's a personal question. A practical one. I need to understand how you operate with a partner." "I don't operate with a partner." "You'll have to for now." He lifted his eyes. Calm, without pressure. "I need to know, do you wait for my signal, or do you act and tell me after?" Grima thought about it. "I act. I tell you when there's time." "Honest," he said. "Then let's agree. If there's even 10 seconds, you tell me. I don't need to be protected from the truth. I just need to know." She looked at him for a moment. "Agreed," she said. He nodded and went back to his things. Grima watched him pack everything away, neatly, quickly, efficiently. No wasted movements, no irritation at the situation they'd both been dropped into. Simply working with what was there. Through the bond, the same business-like calm. No complaints, no hidden anger beneath the surface. If anger was somewhere, it was buried deep enough that Grima couldn't reach it. She thought that he was either very skilled at hiding or genuinely built that way. Both possibilities were inconvenient in their own way. On the third evening, they reached the main road and by nightfall came to a village. Small, 10 houses at most, with a single tavern called Bert's, because the owner's name was Bert and he had not been burdened with an excess of imagination. The tavern was loud. Friday, apparently. A long table against the wall held 15 or so people, mostly men, most of them drunk enough to talk at full volume and laugh at things that weren't funny. Grima went in first. The silence didn't come all at once. It spread gradually, like ripples on water. First, the ones nearest the door fell quiet, then the wave moved further. By the time she reached the bar, the room was still enough to hear the fire crackling in the hearth. "Any rooms?" Grima asked the owner. The owner, not young, with honest, tired eyes, looked at her, then at Gustav coming in behind her, and found enough professionalism not to pause. "Yes. 2. 2, said Gustav. "And food." Coming right up. They sat at a table against the wall, not in the corner, not in full view, somewhere in between, which gave them a sight line without drawing attention. The noise at the long table gradually returned, though a few men kept glancing over. Grima ate and didn't look at them. Gustav ate and watched everything at once, unobtrusively, out of habit, the way people watch who have long since learned to see with the edges of their eyes. 3 of them, he said quietly. Left end of the table, drunk but not that drunk. I see them, just saying. I know why you're saying it. I won't start anything. A pause. Lied, he added, even more quietly, almost to himself. Grima didn't answer. They managed to finish eating and nearly finished drinking before one of the 3, a large man in a leather vest, carrying that particular self-assurance that comes from years of people stepping out of his way, stood up and crossed to their table. He didn't address Gustav. "Hey," he said, looking at Grima. "You know orcs don't come here." 2 others pushed back from the table behind him. Grima slowly set her cup down. "I know," she said evenly. "So what are you doing here?" "Eating," she answered. "I've eaten. I'm leaving." "Hey, I'm talking to you." He moved closer. "I don't like you." "That's your right," said Grima. "No, you don't get it." His voice changed. "I really don't like you." He put his hand on her shoulder. That was a mistake. Not because Grimma lost her composure. She was perfectly calm while doing what she did. She took his hand, twisted the wrist, rose from the bench, turned him, and put his face down on the table with the tidiness of someone who had done it enough times to stop thinking about technique. His friends reacted. She had expected that. The first caught an elbow, the second an open palm to the chest with enough force to send him back into the people behind him. The first tried to rise. He didn't manage it. The man with the wrist groaned against the table. It took, perhaps, 7 seconds. The tavern was silent again. Grimma straightened, picked up her cup from the table, drank what remained, set it back down. Then she heard a stifled sound to her left. Gustav was sitting bent forward, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other to his jaw. His face carried a particular kind of focus, the kind that comes when you need not to show how much something hurts. Grimma looked at him. She knew what had happened, had understood it the moment she felt the first flicker of his pain at the beginning of the fight. Every strike she had landed had gone through him as well. 3 men, a few seconds. For her, a routine job. For him, an unexpected and painful experience without any context. "You said you wouldn't start anything," he managed. He put his hand on my shoulder. "That counts as starting." "By my standards, no." She picked up her pack. "Let's go." Gustav rose, more slowly than he wanted to. That much was clear. The tavern owner looked at them with the expression of a man who wants to say something but isn't sure it's worth it. Gustav set several coins on the counter, more than the meal had cost. "For the trouble," he said. They went out. Outside was cold air and silence after the noise of the tavern. Gustav stopped and leaned against the wall of the house, and for a while simply breathed. "Next time, warn me," he said. 10 seconds ahead, we agreed on that. There weren't 10 seconds. There were. I saw all 3 of them myself, I told you. You had time to say, "I'm about to hit them." Grimma was quiet. "Not because I would have stopped you," he added. His voice steadied. Whatever had been beneath it settled further down. "Just to be ready. That's all I'm asking." She looked at him, at the way he was trying not to hold his ribs, at what was coming through the bond just then. Not anger, but something quieter. Tiredness, and something else she chose not to examine. "Fine," she said. He raised his eyes. "I'll say something," she added. It wasn't an apology. She didn't apologize. It was an acknowledgement that he was right on a specific practical point. Nothing more. From what came through the bond, he understood it exactly that way. The rooms at Bert's were small, with thin walls and beds that creaked at any movement. Gustav lay awake. His ribs ached, not severely, no fractures, simply bruised, the kind that would be a purple mark by morning. He knew how that felt and knew how to live with it. What was worse was something else. His body remembered strikes that hadn't been his, and that foreign memory was more unsettling than the pain itself. He lay and stared at the ceiling. Through the wall, the bond recognized no walls. He'd already established that. Something came from the next room. Steady, deep. She was sleeping, and her sleep was not peaceful, not troubled, not haunted by nightmares, simply heavy. As though even in sleep she carried something she didn't know how to set down. Gustav did not want to feel this. He tried thinking about other things. The mage in Vartok, the mark on the wall of the first tavern, who might have known about the trap in advance. These were useful, practical thoughts worth working through. He held them for roughly 4 minutes before catching himself tracking her background again. He closed his eyes. This is just the curse, he told himself. This isn't me. It's magic that forces attention where it wouldn't otherwise go. It has nothing to do with anything else. It was a reasonable thought, a logical one. Through the wall, something shifted. The heaviness in her sleep sharpened for a moment, then leveled. He felt it before he could stop himself. Gustav opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. Fine, he thought. Just a fact. Just information. The information was this. This woman carried something very old and very heavy, and she carried it with such habit that she had likely long since stopped feeling the weight. It showed not only through the bond, it showed in how she moved, how she answered, how she moved her hand away from something in her pack when she thought he wasn't watching. He was watching, not because he wanted to know, simply because he had always noticed things. Through the wall, something shifted again. She was waking. He felt it in the way her background sharpened, became more alert. A few seconds later, something in the wall, there, where her bed apparently stood, gave a barely audible creak. Gustav didn't move. Through the bond came something unexpected, brief, nearly indistinguishable. Not a thought, not an emotion. Something like a wordless question directed at nothing in particular. Then she slept again. Gustav lay awake for a long time after. I'm tired, he told himself. Everything will be clearer in the morning. That was also a reasonable thought. He fell asleep around the time the sky outside began to pale, with the last thought that 3 days to Vartok had become one. They were nearly there. And tomorrow there would be a mage, and the mage would explain things, and everything would settle into place. He believed that approximately halfway, but halfway was better than nothing. Elias lived at the edge of Vartok, in a house that looked as though it had been built without a plan and added to according to mood. One wing was stone, the other timber, and someone had at some point attached a glassed-in porch to the timber wing, and to the porch a lean-to, beneath which everything that didn't fit inside was stored in complete disorder. The garden in front had long since stopped being a garden and become something between a vegetable patch and an herbarium. Grima stopped at the gate. This is your reliable mage. He's reliable, Gustav confirmed. He just lives unconventionally. You mean like a madman? I mean like a person with many interests and limited patience for order. He pushed the gate open. Elias values results over form. That suits us. The door opened before they had a chance to knock. On the threshold stood an old man, short, lean, in a crumpled robe worn over his clothes, spectacles pushed up on his forehead and a quill tucked behind his ear. His age was the kind difficult to estimate more precisely than a great deal. His face deeply lined, but his eyes quick and alive, carrying that particular brightness that belongs to people who are genuinely interested in what they do. The old mage Elias looked at Gustav, then at Grima, then at Gustav again. You again, he said, without greeting. Me, Gustav agreed. And this time you've managed to... Elias narrowed his eyes, studying the space between them with the expression of someone seeing something the others couldn't. Yes, I see it. Come in. Inside, the house was exactly what the outside had promised. Books on every horizontal surface, including the floor, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, 3 different instruments on a single table whose purpose Grima wouldn't have ventured to guess. It smelled of beeswax, old paper, and something bitter and herbal. Elias directed them to 2 chairs at a large work table, the only clear surface in the room, and sat down across from them. He produced a small crystal sphere from somewhere, turned it in his hands, and put it back with an expression of mild disappointment. tell me," he said. Gustav told it briefly. The temple, the artifact, the simultaneous touch, the loss of consciousness, the symptoms. Elias listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes with his quill in a small book that had appeared from nowhere in particular. When Gustav finished, the mage was quiet for a long moment. "The physical pain transfers to him," Grima said. "The emotional background, to me. I know how it works." Elias rose and moved to the shelves. "I've seen it before, long ago, but I've seen it." He took down a thick volume, leafed through it, found his page. "Sensory bond of dual exchange. Pre-imperial period, believed to have been created as punishment for those who violated the prohibition on entering sacred sites. The logic is straightforward. You caused pain. Now someone else carries it. You conceal your emotions. Now they are visible." "Can it be broken?" Grima asked. Elias replaced the book and looked at her over his spectacles. "It can. There is a ritual, but it requires a specific location, the ruins of the White Threshold, 3 days north, and specific conditions which we'll discuss when you get there." He returned to the table. "The road is not simple. It has its own history." "But it's possible," Gustav said. "It's possible." Elias sat. He paused. "Any trouble with distance on your way here?" "At 40 meters, it becomes difficult," Grima answered. "At 50, worse." "I haven't tested further than that," Gustav added. The mage nodded, matter-of-factly, as though this matched his expectations. "Don't try." He picked up his quill again. "The bond doesn't snap when it breaks. It degrades. First pain, then disorientation, then, if prolonged, damage. Stay within 30 meters of each other unless there's no other choice." "Noted," said Gustav. Elias looked at him for a moment longer than he had before. Something in that look was different. Not magical assessment, but something more personal, as though the old man knew something that wasn't his place to say. "Do you have somewhere to sleep?" he asked at last. "We'll find somewhere," said Gustav. "You can stay here." Elias was already moving deeper into the house. "One room, but it's large. Tomorrow we'll go over the route in more detail." Grima was about to say they would find a tavern, but Gustav was already nodding, and through the bond came something she hadn't expected. Not relief at a problem solved, but something closer to caution, as though he wanted to stay here for a reason he hadn't named aloud. She said nothing. When Elias left the room, Gustav stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the street, with the expression of someone looking not at what is in front of them, but at what they are thinking through. Grima walked over and stood beside him. On the wall by the front door, outside barely visible against the dark stone, something had been scratched. Small, angular, the kind of mark that most people would have taken for an accidental scrape. She had seen it before. Not here, somewhere else, in another city under different circumstances years ago. "You see it," said Gustav. He wasn't asking. "I see it," Grima answered. "What is it?" A pause, long enough to be its own kind of answer. "Tomorrow," he said at last. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the window. Through the bond, nothing, deliberately nothing, as though he had closed something off. It didn't quite work. Beneath that careful stillness, something was there, quiet and watchful, like an animal that has gone still and is waiting. "All right," said Grima. "Tomorrow." They slept in turns. It was a silent decision, no discussion. Grima lay down first, and Gustav sat by the window and made no pretense of intending to sleep. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. Some things between people who know how to read a situation need no explanation. She woke on her own, in the middle of the night, from nothing, without a sound. Simply woke, and immediately knew something was wrong. Not outside yet, inside. Through the bond came something from Gustav that was sharp and concentrated. Not anxiety, but that particular readiness that lives in the second before something begins. She was already sitting up on the bed when he said quietly, without turning from the window. 3 people, the yard and the alley. Professionals. They move correctly. Grimmer stood. Elias already warned him. He'll go through the back. How long have you been watching? About 20 minutes. Gustav turned at last. In the darkness, his face was calm, the working calm of someone for whom this was not the first time. They were waiting for us to sleep, which means they don't want unnecessary noise, which means they want something, either to take us or something we have, or to kill us quietly. Also possible. A brief pause. We could go out through the roof, or meet them here. He looked at her for a moment. We meet them here, he agreed. They didn't have time to take positions. The door came in sooner than expected. Not from outside, but from inside the house, from the corridor, which meant a 4th they hadn't counted. Professionals. Grimmer turned toward the corridor. Gustav toward the window, which in the same instant shattered inward from a blow. What happened in the next 2 minutes was difficult to call a fight in any proper sense. A fight implies some degree of order. This was chaos, fast, dense, in the dark and in close quarters, where every movement ran into something or someone. Grimmer held the corridor. Gustav held the window and took enough through it that she felt it through the bond in flashes. A hit, another hit, pain in the forearm from something sharp. She couldn't afford to be distracted, but each flash of his pain passed through her like interference, brief but real. Then they were separated. The 4th man, the one from the corridor, was faster than she had estimated. He drove her sideways into another room and the door slammed shut between them. Grimmer turned, assessed the distance to the door, the distance to the wall, and felt it. The bond pulled taut. Not immediately. At first it was simply harder, as though the air had thickened. Then a ringing started in her temples. Then pain, not from any strike, but from the stretching itself. A pulling, rising ache that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. She broke the door with her shoulder. On the other side, Gustav was standing against the wall, alone, no attacker nearby, pressing both hands to his head with the look of someone who had been hit by something unplanned. How far? She said. 70 meters, maybe, he answered. That was unpleasant. I've seen worse. I don't doubt it. Outside it was quiet. The attackers had gone, or gone to ground, but more likely gone. Professionals don't stay put when a plan changes. Grimmer looked around. The window, the yard, the alley. Empty. Only wind. They went outside. The night was cold and clear. The moon gave enough light to see the yard, the tree by the fence, the boot print pressed into the soft earth beside the wall. Grimmer crouched and studied the print. Gustav stood beside her and said nothing. She could feel him working through the pain in his forearm methodically, without excess movement. The forearm, she said without looking up. Not deep. It'll pass. Show me. A brief pause. Then he crouched beside her and held out his arm. The cut was shallow. She determined that by touch in the dark, but long. She took a strip of cloth from her belt and bound it without asking permission. He didn't pull away and said nothing. When she finished, they stayed close together, nearer than usual, because of the dark and because 70 meters and ringing temples had just happened. Grima didn't move away. Neither did he. The yard was quiet. Somewhere inside the house, a step creaked. Elias was coming back. They knew where we were, Grima said. Yes. They knew there were two of us. They separated us deliberately. Yes. Something was in his voice she hadn't heard before. Not fear, not anger. Something quieter and more uncomfortable. They knew about the bond. They knew distance weakens us. So someone knew about us before we knew ourselves. Before we knew ourselves, he confirmed. Silence. Real silence, not hostile, not awkward. Simply two people who had just survived the same thing sitting close together, saying nothing, because silence was easier and more honest than words. Grima closed her eyes for a moment. Through the bond came nothing sharp from Gustav. Only that quiet thing she had noticed before. Several times now, always in moments like this one. Something without a name yet. Something she hadn't examined, and which was there regardless. She opened her eye. He was looking in another direction. At the fence, at the tree, at the moon above the roof. She looked away too. Elias appeared in the doorway with a lantern and the expression of someone for whom nights like this had long since ceased to be surprising. Everyone alive? So far, said Gustav. The mage came over, raised the lantern, and looked at them both, quickly, appraisingly. Come inside, he said. There's something I need to tell you. I was going to wait until morning, but there doesn't seem to be much point now. They went in. Inside, Elias set the lantern on the table, opened the same book to a different page, and didn't sit. He stood leaning on the table with both hands, like a man who finds it difficult to say what he's about to say. I didn't tell you everything, he began. When you came to me, I thought one piece of information was enough. The route, the ritual. Straightforward. But what happened tonight changes things. He paused. This curse has a second layer. It activates gradually. Every day you spend together, the bond deepens. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't weaken. It becomes more precise, more fine. You'll begin to feel not just pain and emotional background. You'll begin to feel everything. The room was very quiet. Eventually, Elias continued, you will stop being able to tell where you end and the other person begins. Grima looked at the mage. Her face didn't change. Inside, it did, but that was her own business. That isn't the most important thing, said Elias. He raised his eyes and looked not at Grima, at Gustav. The most important thing is something else. I studied the structure of the spell while you slept. That trap in the temple, it was constructed for two people, deliberately. Someone knew that two people would come to the temple. Someone knew they would reach for the artifact at the same time. A pause. This was not incidental protection, the mage said quietly. This was a trap, set in advance. For the two of you? The silence in the room became something different. Grima turned her head slowly toward Gustav. He was looking at Elias. His face was even. Through the bond, that deliberate stillness she'd learned to recognize. He was closing something off, or trying to. It was working less well than before. Gustav, she said. He finally looked at her and said nothing. That too was an answer. Some things you understand all at once. Fast, clear, with no way not to see them. Others come like water under a door. Slowly, unstoppably, and by the time you notice, it is already too late. Grima looked at the man she had spent 3 days beside. the man whose pain she had carried, the man who had bound her arm in the dark without being asked and without asking for anything in return, and understood that she knew nothing about him, nothing at all. To be continued.